Hi there, I'm Walter Merrick, retired Army. They arrested me for vandalism. Said I broke into a war memorial. What I really did was fix a broken nameplate, one that belonged to a kid who died under my command. But they didn't care about that. All they saw was an old man with dirt on his hands. Not the reason behind it. You ever wonder what it's like to be punished for remembering someone? Let me tell you what really happened. The smell always comes first. Not the sound of gunfire. Not the screaming. Not even the blood. It's the scent, burnt powder and wet dirt, like fireworks and rot soaked into a cotton shirt. I wake up with that smell still clinging to me, like it's been stitched into my skin for 50 years. My name's Walter Merrick. Most people around town just call me Walt. Used to be Sergeant Merrick. Now I'm just the guy who lives above the closed hardware store off Highway 19. Where the rain leaks through the window frame and the TV only gets 2 channels if I jiggle the antenna just right. Every morning I sit by the window and drink my coffee black. Out of the same chipped Marine Corps mug I've had since '78. I don't put anything on. No sugar. No cream. No ceremony. Just hot, bitter truth. Outside, traffic is already building. SUVs and work trucks rolling past with political bumper stickers and cracked taillights. None of them glance up. That's fine. I'm not exactly parade material anymore. On the wall near the door hangs a shadow box. Inside are 5 medals, 3 stripes, and 1 photo. A scrawny Vietnamese American kid, 19, flashing a smile way too big for Warzone. His name was Mickey Tran, short for Michael. He was my radio man. Died under my hands during a night op. Never made it to 20. Most days I don't talk about Mickey. Not to anyone. Not even Amy, my late son's wife, who brings groceries once a week and sometimes stays for lunch if she doesn't have a school meeting. She's a good one. Teaches 4th grade. The kind of young woman who still believes things can change. Today she brought me ham sandwiches and an envelope of old pictures she found in her attic. We sat at the tiny kitchen table with the noisy fridge humming behind us. I didn't say much, just flipped through the photos. One was of my son in uniform. Another was me, younger, skinnier, squinting into desert light. Then Amy said it. They renamed Valor Hill Park today. I looked up. What? They're calling it Central Green now. Some kind of beautification initiative. Families, fountains, food trucks. Mayor Langford's big idea. I blinked, and suddenly the kitchen felt smaller. That's where the memorial wall is, I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant. She corrected, then immediately winced. I mean, it's still there. Just, they're reworking the space. I stood up. I don't remember meaning to. Amy watched me carefully. Walt, it's probably just cosmetic. They're keeping the monuments, I think. But I knew that park. That hill. That wall. I'd knelt in front of it too many times not to notice if something had changed. I didn't finish my sandwich. I put on my coat, found my keys, and drove straight there. The park used to be quiet. It sat on the edge of town like a tired old soldier. Nobody paid it much attention unless it was Memorial Day or a Boy Scout project. But today, there were construction trucks lining the curb. Yellow tape wrapped around the gates. The old stone archway with Valor Hill etched into it had been covered with vinyl signage. Central Green, a place for all generations. I parked across the street and walked up. A young man in a reflective vest and sunglasses stopped me at the gate. Sorry sir, park's closed during renovations. I just want to see the wall, I said. He shrugged. Orders are orders. I looked past him. The flagpole was still there. So was the gravel path. But the trees had been pruned down and the benches removed. The wall, I couldn't see it. You mind telling me what happened to the name plaques? I asked. No idea, sir, he said. You can check with the city office. I stood there for a few seconds, then turned around and walked back to my truck. They renamed it. They fenced it. They pulled up the benches like it was trash day. The worst part? Nobody seemed to care. Later that night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, staring at Mickey's photo. My hearing aid buzzed faintly, but I didn't adjust it. I didn't want to hear anything else. It was funny, in a sick way. Mickey used to joke that if he ever died, he just hoped somebody would remember to spell his name right on whatever rock they carved it into. I made him a promise once. Back when we were soaked and shaking under a poncho in the jungle. If something happens to you, I'll make sure people remember. And now? They paved over that promise like it was pothole season. Ellipsis. The next morning, Amy texted me one sentence. You're not gonna like what they did to the wall. I got to the park just after 9. Morning mist still clung to the grass. And the new sign over the gate looked too clean. Too proud. Central Green, in sleek steel letters. It felt like walking into someone else's memory. Amy was right. The memorial wall wasn't just altered, it was stripped. No plaques. No names. Just a flat slab of polished stone. Now part of some interactive installation, with benches made from recycled lumber and a QR code where the dedication used to be. I stood there, staring at it. 2 joggers passed behind me, earbuds in, laughing about something neither of them would remember by noon. A man pushing a stroller glanced at me, then away. I wasn't what he came to see. I walked the path that used to lead up to the wall. It had been rerouted. The small bronze eagle that perched on the original pedestal was gone. So were the flowers. Even the small American flag someone, probably Amy, used to plant there each Veterans Day. I kept walking until I saw the temporary fencing. It wrapped around a city maintenance shed near the edge of the park. Inside was a pile of wooden beams, torn signage, and what looked like broken stone panels. I couldn't see everything clearly from outside the fence. But something caught the light, metal, bent, half buried under discarded rebar. I knew what it was before I reached it. It was Mickey's nameplate. Scratched, muddy, bent at one corner. I don't remember climbing the fence. I just remember landing hard on the other side. Knees jolting, heart racing harder than it had in years. I pulled the nameplate free with both hands. It was heavier than I remembered. Mickey's name was still legible. Barely. PFC Michael Tran. Kia 04.19.71 Da Nang. I wiped it with my sleeve. The grime smeared, but the name stayed. I held it like I was cradling a newborn. They threw him out like garbage. I slipped the plaque into my coat and climbed back over the fence. My legs didn't bend like they used to. And I scraped my elbow on the way down. Didn't matter. The pain grounded me. It reminded me I was still alive. Even if the world kept acting like I wasn't. Back in the truck, I sat for a while with the engine off. The cold creeping in through the cracked windows. Mickey's nameplate lay across my lap. I ran my fingers over the edges. Every groove etched with time. I didn't cry. That part of me doesn't work right anymore. But something swelled in my chest, a mixture of anger and duty. Not rage, something colder, sharper. This wasn't vandalism. This was erasure. And I wasn't going to let them finish the job. When I got home, I cleared the table, turned on the old desk lamp, and laid the plaque down. I found a rag, a bottle of Brasso that hadn't been used in decades, and started to work. It was slow going. Each scratch brought something back. Not just Mickey, but the mud, the heat, the shouting, the silence after. I didn't speak a word for hours. Just polished. My hands were trembling by the end. But the name was brighter now. Still not perfect, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to be seen. Amy came by around 4 p.m., knocking lightly before letting herself in. She stopped in the doorway when she saw me. "Walt," she said softly, "what did you do?" I didn't answer right away. I looked up at her, then down at the plaque. She stepped closer, reading the name, and her face changed. "Is this?" I nodded. "They threw him away." She sat down across from me. Her hands folded in her lap. "You can't just take it back," she whispered. "I didn't take it," I said. "I reclaimed it." We sat in silence for a long time. "I know you're angry," she said finally. "And you have every right to be. But please, don't do anything that'll get you in real trouble." I looked her in the eye. "What do you think this is?" She flinched a little, but held her ground. "Just promise me you'll think before you act." I didn't promise. That night, I stayed up sharpening my wire cutters. At 3:12 a.m., I clipped the bolt cutters onto the chain link fence. The metal snapped like it was meant to open for me. I stepped through the gap in the fence, careful not to rattle the links. The night was quiet, no wind, no sirens, just the low hum of streetlights off in the distance. Even the cicadas had gone silent. Like they knew this wasn't a moment for noise. The park looked different at night. Stripped of its fake banners and glossy signs. It felt naked. The concrete paths shimmered under the sodium lights. And the new benches, modern, curved, lifeless, sat empty like props on a soundstage. I carried Mickey's nameplate tucked under my jacket, wrapped in an old dish towel like it was something sacred. In a way, it was. I made my way to the wall, what was left of it. They hadn't destroyed it completely. Just sterilized it, smoothed the edges, removed the grit. The part of the wall where Mickey's name used to be now held a touchscreen map of walking trails. I pulled off my gloves and laid the plaque on the ground. I stared at it for a second, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. Then I knelt down, pulled the roll of wire from my coat pocket, and started attaching it. The stone was cold. The new construction screws had been sunk too deep to reuse, so I had to work around them. The wire bit into my fingers as I looped it through the holes. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, but it held. When I finished, I stepped back and looked at it. Mickey's name, dull bronze and scratched, was home again. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, breath fogging in the cool air. The only sound was the quiet click of a motion sensor camera across the plaza. I didn't flinch, let them record it. I wasn't hiding. I turned to leave and froze. A security guard was standing at the edge of the path, maybe 50 feet away. He didn't say anything, just watched. His radio crackled once, then went quiet. We stared at each other. I didn't run, didn't speak. After a beat, he nodded, just barely, and turned away. By the time I got home, the adrenaline had worn off, replaced with something heavier. I took off my boots, sat on the couch, and stared at the empty space on the wall where the shadow box used to hang. I'd taken it down earlier that day. It didn't feel right leaving it up like a museum display while Mickey was sitting in a trash pile. The next morning, someone knocked hard on my door. Not Amy, not a neighbor. 2 uniformed officers. I opened the door slowly, one hand on the frame. "Walter Merrick?" one asked. "Yes. You'll need to come with us." I nodded, grabbed my jacket, and followed them down the stairs. No handcuffs, no shouting, just a quiet walk to the back of the cruiser. On the ride to the station, I watched the city roll past, strip malls, gas stations, the blinking sign outside the VFW where no one under 60 ever went. Everything looked normal, like the world didn't even notice what it had thrown away. They booked me but didn't process me. Not yet. I sat in a gray room with a metal table, empty walls, and a buzzing ceiling light. After about an hour, a woman walked in wearing a dark blazer and holding a folder. "Mr. Merrick," she said, "I'm Assistant District Attorney Linda Torres. You've been charged with trespassing and destruction of city property." I didn't answer. She opened the folder. "Do you understand the charges?" "I understand words," I said. "What I don't understand is calling it destruction when I was fixing what they broke." She didn't flinch. "The park is a restricted construction site. What you did may have sentimental value, but it was unauthorized." I leaned forward. "Sentimental?" She closed the folder. "You'll be arraigned tomorrow morning." And just like that, she left. No lecture, no yelling, just procedure. I spent the night in a holding cell that smelled like bleach and tired men. One guy snored in the corner. Another muttered to himself in broken phrases. I didn't speak to any of them. At sunrise, a guard handed me a cold biscuit and led me to the courtroom. Amy was already there. She sat in the front row, holding something in her lap. When I was brought in, our eyes met, and she nodded, not out of approval, but understanding. That meant more to me than any lawyer could offer. The prosecutor read the charges. Torres stood without expression. Then the judge asked, "Mr. Merrick, do you have representation?" I stood up. "I'll represent myself." The judge frowned. "Are you sure?" "I've stood alone before," I said. "This won't be the hardest place I've ever done it." The courtroom was still. Torres cleared her throat. "We request a no-contact order with any city construction sites and recommend community service." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And the defendant?" I said nothing, just looked at Mickey's name in my mind. Then Amy stood. "Your Honor, I have something to say." She walked forward, holding a photograph. This is the boy you called a plaque. Amy's voice didn't shake. She held the photo up with both hands. Her chin lifted, her tone even, like a teacher in front of a classroom. Not a woman standing in a courtroom full of strangers. Not a widow carrying the weight of 2 generations. This is Private First Class Michael Tran, she said, 19 years old, shot and killed on April 19, 1971. He served with the United States Marine Corps. He didn't have a headstone because his family couldn't afford one. But he had a nameplate, a place, until someone threw it out. She looked over at me, then back at the judge. That man over there didn't break into a park. He walked back into a battlefield. He didn't destroy city property. He put a name back where it belonged. No one said a word. The judge cleared his throat and looked to the ADA. Ms. Torres? She stood, a little slower this time. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the emotional context, the facts remain. I'd like to speak, I interrupted. Torres blinked. The judge gave a cautious nod. Proceed. I stepped forward. I didn't have anything written. Never did know how to make speeches. But when you've held someone's last breath in your hands, you don't need a script. I was Mickey's sergeant. He followed every order I gave him, even the ones that got him killed. Silence. He was 19, had a brother back home and a picture of a girl in his pocket. He always talked too loud and laughed at his own jokes. He wasn't a hero. He was just a kid who didn't get the chance to become anything else. I took a breath. Somewhere along the line, we decided memory was negotiable. That if something wasn't profitable or polished, we could cover it up, rename it, fence it off. I pointed to the nameplate Amy had placed on the evidence table. You want to find me? Go ahead. Jail me? Sure, but don't tell me I vandalized something. That's not vandalism, that's memory. I looked the judge dead in the eye. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to remember. You could hear the air shift. That kind of silence that only happens when people realize they've been wrong too long. The judge didn't respond right away. He shuffled some papers, avoided eye contact, then recessed the court. Back in holding, I sat on a bench against the wall. Amy came to see me during the break, her hands stuffed in the pockets of her coat. That was brave, she said. I wasn't trying to be brave. I know, she said, that's why it worked. Later that afternoon, they transferred me back to the county jail. On the way, the deputy driving the van glanced at me through the mirror and said, "My uncle was in Nam. Never talks about it. You talked today. That means something." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I didn't know what to do with it. That night in the cell, I lay down on the stiff cot and stared at the ceiling. No smell of gunpowder, no screaming. Just the faint memory of Mickey laughing at a joke I've long forgotten. The next morning, when they brought me back to court for the continuation, the room was different. There were more people. More seats filled, veterans in old jackets, a woman wearing a gold star pin, even a few teenagers in ROTC uniforms sitting in the back. Amy sat closer to the aisle this time, her hands clasped tight. The judge took the bench. But before he could speak, the courtroom doors creaked open. A man in army dress uniform stepped inside. Not loud, not flashy, just steady. He walked to the back of the room, paused, and then raised his hand in a salute toward me. I didn't recognize him, but I knew exactly what it meant. You only get saluted like that for one of two reasons. You outrank someone, or you've done something worth more than rank. The judge was still speaking, but no one was listening anymore. They say one man can't change the system. They're right, most of the time. But sometimes, one man can make it blink. That morning, after the salute, everything slowed down. The judge's mouth was still moving. The prosecutor was still holding her notes. But the room had shifted. Like everyone finally realized they were in the middle of something that might matter. The man in uniform lowered his hand. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just stood there, shoulders square, eyes forward, a silent statement. The kind that hits harder than a gavel. Amy turned to look at me. Her eyes said it all. This is bigger now. More people entered as the hearing resumed. An older man in a wheelchair with a 2nd infantry cap. A woman holding a framed photo of her brother in a Navy uniform. I didn't know their names, but I knew their faces. I'd seen them in different wars. Different towns, different waiting rooms. Torres, the prosecutor, requested a continuance, said new testimony and public response had complicated the optics. That's the word she used. Optics. Like truth needed makeup. The judge agreed to delay the ruling. Said he wanted to evaluate all angles. That's fine. Let him take his time. The story was already out. And it spread fast. By the time Amy and I got back home, there were reporters waiting on the sidewalk. One had a camera crew. Another held a microphone and asked, "Mr. Merrick, do you believe your actions were justified?" I didn't answer. I just walked inside. Amy stayed back to speak to them. I watched from the window as she spoke with calm, fire-edged clarity. She told them what I did. More importantly, she told them why. That night, the first video went live, a clip of me standing in court, saying, "I didn't come here to fight. I came to remember." The next morning, it had over 300,000 views. By lunch, the hashtag remember his name was trending. People posted pictures of their fathers, brothers, and mothers who'd served. Some shared stories of names carved in stone. Others wrote about names that were never added, lost files, forgotten units, misclassified records. It became something more than me. And then, something else happened. Amy forwarded me an email. It had been leaked to a local veteran group and was now spreading fast. It was from the office of Harold Langford, the city council president, dated 6 months earlier. It detailed a land use agreement to lease part of Valor Hill Park to a private developer in exchange for campaign support and renovation incentives. In the attachment, a line item for memorial structure removal and material salvage. Estimated scrap value, $3.400. $3,400. That's what Mickey's plaque was worth to them. Langford tried to deny it. Of course, called it a misunderstanding, blamed it on staff. But the story wouldn't die. By the end of the week, local news anchors were quoting me. Veterans organizations were issuing statements. Even a state senator tweeted the video, calling it a sobering reminder of what remembrance should really mean. People started coming to the park. Not just veterans, families, kids, a few tourists who'd seen the story online. Some brought flowers, others brought photos. One man brought a welding torch and offered to help restore the plaques. Langford called an emergency city council meeting. He didn't make it past the first 5 minutes before people started booing. Amy spoke again, this time in front of the council. Her voice was steadier than ever. "You can't sell memory," she said. "You can't rebrand sacrifice. You can't pave over a name and expect us to forget who we buried there." They voted unanimously to cancel the lease. Langford resigned the next day. No apology, no press conference, just a typed letter and a fast exit. And still, through it all, I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't care, but because I wanted the story to speak louder than I ever could. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. "You're cordially invited to attend the rededication of Valor Hill Park." I held the letter for a long time before I opened it. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, my name typed clean across the front like a wedding invite. Inside, a formal note from the city, signed by the new acting mayor. They wanted me to attend the rededication of Valor Hill Park. They called it a celebration of legacy and honor. Funny how quick people change the words when cameras show up. I didn't RSVP. Didn't say yes, didn't say no. I left the letter on the counter and went about my usual routine. Coffee, walk, a few half-hearted stretches to remind my knees I still needed them. But something sat different in my chest. The story wasn't mine anymore. It had grown legs. It walked out into the world. People were painting murals, making hashtags, organizing cleanup events at other neglected memorials across the state. They called me a symbol. I wasn't sure if that was praise or punishment. Amy came by the next day and saw the letter. She picked it up, read it, then looked at me. "You going?" "Don't know yet," I said. She leaned against the counter. "They're doing it right this time. Bringing in veterans, inviting families. Mickey's niece is going to read the names." I raised an eyebrow. Didn't know Mickey had a niece. "She was born 2 years after he died," she said, "named after him." Michelle. She's 17 now. That hit harder than I expected. Mickey was always talking about being the cool uncle. Said he'd teach his nephews how to throw a spiral and scare the hell out of their prom dates. Said he'd tell them stories they'd never believe. Now he had a niece he never met. And she was going to say his name out loud for the first time in public. I looked away. Amy didn't push. That night, I sat at the table. The nameplate back in its shadow box. Clean and reattached. Placed beneath Mickey's photo. I stared at it a long time. I remembered things I hadn't let myself remember in years. The way Mickey would hum when he was nervous. The time he tripped getting out of the chopper and laughed it off even as bullets cracked overhead. The way he whispered, "Tell my mom I did good," while his blood soaked into my uniform. I'd spent years carrying those moments like cinder blocks strapped to my ribs. And for the first time, they didn't feel like weight. They felt like a story finally being told. I woke up the morning of the ceremony before dawn. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't dress up. Just put on a clean shirt, brushed my boots, and walked to the park alone. The city had put out folding chairs, a podium, flags on both sides. A small crowd had already gathered, veterans in old uniforms, families in matching shirts with names printed on the back, reporters holding cameras low for now. No banners, no food trucks, just people. I stood behind the tree line, far enough to be unseen. I didn't need the front row. I just needed to know the plaque was there. And it was. Recast in bronze, repolished, remounted into the stone wall. Mickey's name, centered and crisp. They hadn't changed a single letter. The mayor gave a speech. A priest said a prayer. Then they brought out the girl, Michelle. She walked up to the podium in a black dress, hair tied back, holding a folded paper with both hands. She was trembling. But when she spoke, her voice was clear. "My name is Michelle Tran. I never met my Uncle Mickey. But because of someone who remembered him, I now know who he was. Today, I'll read the names of the men who served with him and didn't come home." She began reading. I listened. Not just to the names, but to the way she said them. Like they meant something. Like every syllable weighed what a life should weigh. And when she said, "Private First Class Michael Tran," she paused, just slightly, and smiled. That was enough. I didn't stay for the whole thing. I turned and walked away before the news cameras swung around. Didn't need to be in the photos. I already had my proof. As I walked back toward the edge of the park, I passed a young soldier standing off to the side. Army uniform, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't salute me, didn't speak. He just nodded. Like he knew. That night, back at home, I whispered to Mickey's photo. They remembered. Kid. The next morning, I opened a letter I'd left untouched for almost 20 years. It was from Mickey's mother. It had come in the mail sometime in 2004. A couple months after I moved back to Georgia. I'd never responded, never even unfolded it all the way. It sat in the drawer beneath my old field jacket, yellowed and soft at the edges. But today, it felt like time. I peeled the envelope open with care, like I might tear something irreplaceable. Inside, a single page, handwritten in shaky cursive. Dear Sergeant Merrick, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gathered the courage to send it. I don't want to burden you. I just want to say thank you. You brought my boy home. You stayed with him when I couldn't. You carried more than I asked. And I'm sorry for that. I never blamed you. Not once. Please don't spend your life doing it yourself. Her signature was small and slanted. Margaret Tran. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I folded the paper again, this time gently, and placed it in the box beside Mickey's nameplate. No more hiding. That same day, I drove over to the old VFW hall. It was one of those places with too many folding chairs and a popcorn machine that hadn't worked since the Gulf War. I'd been a member for years but hadn't gone inside since 2012. They'd painted the outside since then. New sign, same crooked American flag hanging above the door. Inside, the place was full. Not packed like a concert. Full like a family gathering. Quiet conversations. Tables with coffee-stained napkins. A slideshow playing on a cheap projector. Photos of young men with flat tops and lost eyes. I didn't recognize most of the faces. But when I walked in, A few turned. One man, bald, heavy-set, wearing a jacket full of pins, stood up. "You're Merrick, right?" I nodded. He held out his hand. "Marine, 72. I saw the hearing. That was something. I wasn't trying to make something," I said. He grinned. "You did anyway." We talked for a while. Nothing big, just names, units, bases, men we both might have known. It felt strange, being back in a room with others who got it without having to explain every inch of your soul. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "They're naming the memorial wall after him. The one you fixed." I blinked. "After Mickey?" He nodded. "The city voted last night. Official renaming ceremonies next month. They're calling it the Michael Tran Memorial Wall." I didn't say anything for a long time. Not because I didn't have words, but because for once, silence was enough. Afterward, I walked the halls of the VFW slowly. On one wall, there was a framed set of medals behind glass, a bronze star, a purple heart, and a crumpled photograph taped to the corner. Underneath, a name I didn't know. But I paused there longer than I should have. Each frame on that wall was a story like mine. Like Mickey's, some told, some still buried under dust. I thought about how many stories never got a second chance. How many names never got someone to fix their plaque, read their letter, or say, "He did good." And I wondered if I still had the time, and the strength, to be that someone for someone else. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table again. A pen in my hand. An empty sheet of paper in front of me. I started writing a letter to Mickey's niece. I didn't know what I was going to say, only that I needed to say it before it was too late. I never did like microphones. But there I was, standing behind one again, this time. Not as a defendant or a witness, but as a man holding a folded letter and a lump in his throat. The ceremony had drawn more people than anyone expected. Rows and rows of chairs stretched across the green. Flags lined the sidewalk. Someone from the American Legion had set up a temporary tent with coffee and water bottles. Local TV vans lined the edge of the park. Drones buzzed overhead, quiet and watchful. They'd redone everything. The stone wall had been scrubbed clean. Bronze plaques re-leveled. A new panel installed with raised letters. The Michael Tran Memorial Wall, in honor of those who served without glory, but with heart. Michelle was there. Amy too. So were dozens of faces I didn't recognize. But all of them looking at that wall like it held a piece of someone they'd lost. Before the event started, a city councilwoman approached me. Young, clean suit, voice rehearsed. "Mr. Merrick," she said, "on behalf of the city, we want to thank you for your service and for bringing attention to a place that should have never been forgotten." She offered a small wooden box. Inside, a bronze replica of Mickey's plaque, engraved with my name beneath his. I didn't take it. "I appreciate the gesture," I said, "but I'd rather you install a bench instead. One without a plaque, just a place to sit." She nodded, maybe not fully understanding, but she didn't press. When they called me to speak, I almost didn't go up. But Amy gave me a look, the kind that says, "You don't have to, but you should." So I did. I unfolded the letter in my hand. The one I'd written to Michelle weeks earlier, but never mailed. I read from it. "Dear Michelle, you never met your uncle. But I did, and the thing I want you to know is this: he wasn't perfect. He wasn't a legend, he was just good, in the quiet ways that matter. He looked out for the new guys. He didn't run. He cracked jokes when we needed them and stayed still when we couldn't afford to break." I paused. The crowd listened. Not a single phone rang. I spent years thinking my silence was loyalty. That not speaking about what happened meant I was honoring the dead. But silence is tricky. Sometimes it protects, other times it erases. I looked at her then. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say his name." Michelle stood in the front row. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry, she just nodded. That was more than enough. I stepped down and took a seat at the edge of the crowd. Then the ceremony shifted. A journalist in the back raised her hand, unplanned. She asked if the city had investigated how the original plaques were removed without public notice. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The city representative tried to move on, but a veteran near the podium interrupted, said he'd been trying to contact the Parks Department for months and never got a response. Then someone else stood up. And another. A man in a suit tried to speak. But the crowd was louder now. Not angry, just determined. The kind of noise that says, "We've been quiet long enough." Someone pulled out their phone and started reading excerpts from emails leaked from Langford's office. Another man shouted, $3.400 to melt down memory. And that's when the momentum broke wide open. Local activists who had been watching the case brought forward a stack of documents, records showing city plans to repurpose Valor Hill as part of a recreational expansion district. Real estate maps, memos, proposals marked confidential. Langford wasn't there to answer, but his name kept echoing. And then, in the middle of it all, Amy stood. No microphone, no script. She said, "My husband died overseas. I buried him with full honors. But memory isn't a one-day thing. You either live with it, or you forget it, and I'm tired of forgetting." Silence followed. Real, still, trembling silence. It wasn't official. No gavel dropped. No judge banged a desk. But that was the moment Valor Hill changed for good. The city later announced a full inquiry into past land use agreements. The memorial was placed under historical protection. Veterans were invited to join an oversight committee. And a group of high school kids started a community project to record stories from local service members. Old and new. Mickey's story was the first they recorded. Back home that night, I found a small envelope slid under my door. No return address. Just a single sentence on the card inside. "He'd be proud, Sarge." I showed up early. No one saw me arrive. No speeches today. No news vans. Just a Tuesday morning in October. The air crisp. Sky still a little bruised from the dawn. I walked slow. Past the freshly cut grass. Past the new plaques and trimmed hedges. Until I stood again in front of his name. Michael Tran. There it was. Centered. Clean. Unmistakable. I sat on the bench. The one I'd asked them to put there instead of giving me some honorary trinket. No plaque. Just smooth wood and silence. That was enough. A soft breeze moved through the park. Somewhere nearby, a maintenance truck coughed to life. Then rolled away. Farther off, I heard a school bell ring. Life. Moving on. That's the part they never tell you about war. It doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends in pieces long after. In strange places. In courtrooms. On sidewalks. At breakfast tables. And sometimes, sitting alone beside a name that almost vanished. I reached into my coat and pulled out something I hadn't touched since that first day. Mickey's dog tag. Still on its original chain. Still bent on one side from the blast that took him. I rubbed my thumb across the numbers. My hands didn't shake like they used to. And then I said it. Quiet and steady. Still holding the line. "Mickey." A soft voice behind me said, "He'd say the same about you." I turned. It was Michelle. She held 2 coffees, handed me one, sat down without asking. We didn't talk for a while. Just sipped in the silence. Then she asked, "Was he scared?" I didn't lie. Yeah, we all were. But he didn't run. Not once. She nodded. Did he know it mattered? I looked back at the wall. I think he hoped it did. Now he knows for sure. Michelle reached into her jacket and pulled something out. A folded flag. Not regulation. Just a small one. Handmade. "Someone mailed this to me," she said. No return address. Just a note that said, "This belongs with the name." She stood and gently tucked it into the space between the stone and Mickey's plaque. A gesture so small it could have been missed. But to me, it was the loudest kind of honor. We sat there a little longer. When she left, I stayed. Watched the sun inch higher. Watched shadows shift across the names. Watched an old man walk his dog along the far path. Life. Again. Still moving. I stood. Straightened my back. Ran my hand one last time over Mickey's name. Then turned toward the street. Coffee in one hand. Dog tag in the other. I didn't feel like a symbol. Didn't feel like a forgotten soldier. Just felt whole. Not because the past had healed. But because I'd finally stopped hiding from it.